Now this week, the globe commemorated World Food Day, which is aimed at creating awareness around issues of food insecurity. This year, the day is clouded by water troubles as well as increasing droughts and floods. Let's bring in Wandile Sihlobo, who is a chief economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa. He joins us via our video link this morning. Wandile, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. And that name, right, World Food Day, is perhaps a misnomer, especially in a country like ours, where so much of the population is food insecure.
Yeah, good morning, Michelle. You 100% correct in a sense that in South Africa, we remain with a major challenge because at a national level, we are food secure. We are a country that is exporting about half of what we produce in value terms. But the challenge which you're referring to is really acute at a household level, where you're still sitting with roughly just over 6 million South Africans that are in a position of food insecurity. So when we're reflecting on a World Food Day, it does then ask the question to say, what are we doing to improving the conditions of those households? But at the same time, what can we do to ensure that the steps that we have taken, at least at a national level, we also don't lose competitiveness on that? So in a way, the day offers us an opportunity to reflect on that. But I think this should be a continuous journey, not something that we do only on the 16th of October.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the numbers, the statistics around food security, food insecurity in our country are incredibly shocking, aren't they, Wandile? I mean, the projection is that by 2025, and that's not far away, it's just over a year away, half of the population in South Africa will be food insecure.
Yeah, I saw the worrying numbers that were coming out from one of the retailers this week. And I must say that I would take a slightly different view from what they are saying there, not to dismiss the challenges that are there on food insecurity. I think it's acute, it's there. And the challenge of South Africa, because when we talk about food security, we're really looking at about 3 layers of this in its formal definition. Because you're looking at affordability, availability, and issues around safety. And I think in all of those, South Africa is doing reasonably well. But the challenge that we're having is on the affordability side. And then the question comes to say, if we are this country that is the most food secure country in sub-Saharan Africa, when you're looking at a national level, how do we begin then to deal with some of those challenges that remain at a household level? And I think the solution there has to be multi-layered, because the poverty that does exist in South Africa is more on an income poverty rather than the prices rising at unsustainable level when you're looking at this over the long term. Of course, we do have the inflation challenges that are here in the near term, but hunger in South Africa has been with us for some time. And I think we have to be resolving job creation issues while at the same time doing something in agriculture. The reason, though, I say the studies that came up this week talking about nearly half of our population may be food insecure by within the next couple of years, I think they discount some of the interventions that I see from private sector as well as in government related, for example, to agricultural master plan that in the subsector level is being done, and there talks about the potential release of over 2 million hectares of land that can be put into production. And I think if all of that creates jobs and improves economic activity in South Africa, it can have a bit of more positive. But then if nothing is being done, then we do face somewhat a very challenging next couple of years. Yeah,
you're referring to the ShopRite Food Index, which I actually have on the front page of the Mercury, and they're making that prediction around hunger levels in our country over the next year and a half or so. So you're talking about, Wandile, part of the solutions lying in the things that we know we need to address in our country, right? Job creation, load shedding, this is all eating into our ability to ensure food security for the poorest of the poor in our country. So tackle that. That's the advice to government. Easier said than done.
Yeah, I mean, easier said by done, because, Michelle, let's face it, even if you were to say, I'm making now an example, you take a pack, say, of rice, it is at a price of 10 rand. You can drop it and put it at 5 rand. If there is no income in a household, there is no income, it will still remain difficult to afford that. So the solution could be, while you are dealing with all of the other issues that face the country, but resolve the issue of jobs. See the measures of supporting households that we have now. but most importantly, take on the low-hanging fruits. The reason I was centering my response to you to agriculture, if you look at where this poverty is acute in South Africa, largely 3 provinces. If you think about the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, KZN, there are some of those provinces that have high levels of food insecurity, but there are also provinces with high potential for agricultural development. But what is constraining that? There's a couple of hectares of land that is in the state hands, in addition to what is in the former homelands in a customary ownership and that. Then we need to bring that into full production and ask the private sector to say, guys, come in to develop the value chain so that there is agro-processing. We know the population that we have in South Africa, that some of the people have not been as fortunate to get higher levels of education. Therefore, the sector of agriculture and agro-processing could absorb those people, income begin to develop. And of course, then with the hope of upskilling those people over the long term. I do think that all of these multifaceted solutions need to be put in place. Of course, there's a lot that can be done in other sectors, but I think that jobs and the agricultural development and dealing with the rural economy as well as the peri-urban, because that's where we see some of these problems really being more acute.
Yeah. So let's hone in on agriculture, Wandile, and part of that discussion surely is going to be around water, right? Speaking of projections around food insecurity and that 2025 date that we discussed earlier, there's another date that we have to keep in mind, and that is the year 2050. And at that stage, the world will have a quarter less water than we have now. How does the water issue, agriculture, how does that feed into the food security picture here at home?
You are lifting a very important issue, Michelle, here, because the water, and I would even add to your point and say the entire climate change and the shock we use, how should we be coping with that? And we know that South Africa is a semi-arid country, so very challenged when there are all of these climatic shocks. And I think what we have to really be focusing on a lot is embracing also the technology of saying seed breeding. Can we develop better seed varieties that are able to withstand some of the harsh climatic conditions? And that's something that the private sector is already doing. But then that could raise also another one to say, if you are a smallholder farmer farming in Flagstaff or in Bizana, can you be able to afford those seeds? And how do you make sure that you cope with all of those? Which is why I very much liked what was in the agriculture and agro-processing master plan, developed not only by the government, but co-created with private sector, labor, and the other stakeholders, because they came in with a number of solutions around these aspects. And I do think that they need to go back to those commitments they made in May 2022 and really to say, let's lift that document and see how do we implement it now, so that when those challenges that ShopRite highlighted, as well as the ones that you are lifting up now, arrive, we are in a far better place. But if we sit in a place of inaction, then, I mean, all of those predictions will be a self-fulfilling prophecy then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, speaking of sitting in a place of inaction, how are we faring compared to other countries around the world that are comparable to South Africa? Because this issue is such an important one, isn't it? It's not just around food insecurity, but it's around how these households and their lack of nutritious food contributes to the development of children, right? Children, there's another interesting number here, 70% of children born into poverty facing stunted growth, malnutrition, and this is an important one as well, impaired cognitive and physical development. All of these issues ultimately feed into what the other issue we were discussing, Wandile, around, you know, solutions and what the solutions are here. Employment, education. How are these children that are facing these challenges of malnutrition, impaired cognitive development, you know, how are they going to get into the chain of employment, essentially feed into the economy of the country, and so the cycle continues to turn?
Michelle, you are speaking right at the heart of it, because at the end of the day, nobody farms for fun or do what we do for fun. At the end of the day, it's about human development and bettering the livelihood. And I think in South Africa, and in fact, right now there's a lot of negative news, but I do think, Michelle, it's important we highlight that at a national level, we are doing reasonably well. Take us compared with the rest of the world. There's an index that is published annually by the Economist magazine. It's called the Global Food Security Index. It ranks about 113 countries. in that index, South Africa has done reasonably better, having moved from position 70 last 2021, in 2022 at around about 59, which is why I was saying it's the most food secure country in the sub-Saharan Africa at national level. And of course, in Africa, second on that. But then the question then is to go to the heart of what you're saying, to say, okay, all good and well, we are doing well at a national level, and we have to maintain that. But then how do we begin to address some of these problems that are at a more local level? And I think this is where then the agricultural sector for me is very important to say in those rural economies of the Eastern Cape, of Limpopo, of KZN, and other provinces of South Africa. How do we reignite that activity so that in turn it begins to resolve and contribute positively in resolving those challenges that those households face? Because then if there is no economic activity there, then those problems and that bleak future that you're referring to because of the lack of income, the lack of nutrition, and the food insecurity issues in those households, and it becomes a spiraling thing. And we know what the solution lies in South Africa. And there are all of these willing partners that sit on the table and say they are willing. And I think for me now, having written everything that we have put on paper, we have to show some bit of commitment. And this is where I think Minister Didiza, the Director General, Dr. Ramasodi at the Department of Agriculture, with all of the agribusinesses and ourselves at AgBiz, we really have to sit down and say the implementation path, it has to be clear, and we have to do something in the near term. Yeah,
absolutely. Because those households that are struggling, Wandile, they don't care what our ranking is, right? For them, it's just the complete unaffordability of food. Black Sash tells us that food prices have increased year on year, and we know that social grants have not.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes feel conflicted. I mean, I'm on national television now talking about us ranking better, being second most food secure in Africa. Some people will take that as not kindly, because you cannot be saying that while you have this acute levels of food insecurity at a household level, which is where then I was saying the issue here is not so much about the affordability, the access, and all of those things. It's the fact that there is no income in many areas of South Africa. And I do support and agree with some of the NGOs, Black Sash and the others, which had also promoted the issues of saying, look, let's ensure that there is local gardening and all of these sort of things that can support household. But I think those cannot really sustain whole food nutrition for a year, but they play an important role, which is why then the issues of jobs and even some of these household income support that the government have been putting in place, they do play a certain significant role in here. But for me, I would still say the solution lies on making sure that we get jobs and we revitalize all of the sectors that can support that to happen. I'm speaking more on the sector that I research, which is agriculture, but I think there's many more sectors of our economy that can create the jobs. But some of the problems, of course, are well known. They are in energy constraints, in the network industry, logistics, and the others. All of those are some of the stuff that is actually hindering those investments. And I think we have to have appreciation of how all of these come together to constrain and cause the challenges that we do face at a household level. Yeah, absolutely. It is such a wide-ranging issue, the issue of food security.
Wandile Sihlobo, let me thank you for your time this morning. He's a chief economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa.